And my last question, obviously the mass mobilization we're seeing is over police brutality, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, all of the names that we know and we don't know that have been murdered. But I wanted to ask you, as somebody who talks a lot about outside of electoral politics and mass mobilization, does what we're seeing, I mean, we haven't seen coordinated, organized mass movements, it looks like predominantly young people around the country for this long, since the 1960s maybe. Does this foreshadow what is possible when people have spoken about a general strike down the road? Does this show, obviously right now the focus is on Black Lives Matter, but could this become something more in due time?
There is no question we are witnessing a historic global rebellion of an entire generation. And as we're seeing these really important glimmers of hope, where sections of the labor movement are taking a bold stance alongside these movements, that's a very critical development. And so there's no question that the uprising that is going on right now, the rebellion, foreshadows what is possible. It gives us a feel for the potential of the kind of mass fighting movements that we could develop and that ordinary people are capable of organizing. And I think what we need to recognize, one, is that this is not a time for pessimism. This is a time to understand that despite setbacks, despite what could be a stunning effect of the recession, which will push people back a little bit because it's going to be extremely hard, we're heading into seriously tough times with a recession that is going to look as bad or even worse than the Great Depression. And so it is going to be a very challenging process for working people to deal with this. But rather than allow that kind of stunning effect or demoralization to tell us that somehow that's going to be a massive setback, we should understand that despite those temporary setbacks, what we are seeing is a historic moment. It's a turning point where globally, hundreds of millions of people are saying we're fed up with this system, with the status quo. We want something different. And the kind of solidarity that you see in the George Floyd protests, that portends what could potentially achieved, because these are multiracial protests, and they have been very doggedly multiracial, and that's very important. I mean, it's an important distinction from the early days of the Black Lives Matter protests, where the question of racial divisions was much more pronounced. So obviously they are pronounced now as well, but and movements have to recognize that racial injustice has to be specifically taken up in the movements. But the movements are also recognizing that if we remain divided in the working class across race and ethnic lines, then we are never going to be able to fight for a different system. And I think that is starting to dawn on our movements. I will say this in closing. It's extremely critical that our movements understand that we have to organize independently of the political establishment, independently of big business. And that means we have to get organized. Leadership is important. I know there is maybe a certain trend in the movement that we don't want any leadership because we've seen so many leaders betray us, which is completely understandable. But we also have to understand that there is no movement without leadership. There's always going to be a leadership. Even when you say there's no leadership, there's somebody providing a leadership. The question is that leadership accountable to the working class and to the marginalized communities? Can that leadership be held accountable? Is that leadership organizing in a way that it's rooted in the movement and organizing in solidarity with the movement? And are the leaders we have actually independent of corporate and establishment influence? And that's why the small example that we have provided through our Marxist Council office is an important example, because it shows what's possible when you have independent elected representatives that stand with the movement and are not bought out by the corporate establishment.
Well said. Thank you, Seattle City Council member Kshama Sawant. We'll stay in touch. Hopefully your legislation gets some traction there.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Jordan.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.